welcome to our daily devotional series, Messages from Tiny People. And our lesson today is entitled Importance of Scars. And we are going to derive this lesson from the book of John chapter 20, verse 25 and 27. And I'm going to read verse 25, and the Bible says, So the other disciples told him, We have seen the Lord. But he replied, Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my fingers where the nails have been and put my hands into his side, I will never believe. And verse 27 of the same chapter says, Then he said to Thomas, Reach your finger here and look at my hand, and reach your hand here and put it in my side. Do not be unbelieving, but believing. And so here we find Jesus talking to Thomas, Thomas who was a believer, a disciple of Christ. He had followed Christ from the day Christ called him to follow him as his disciple. But Thomas had a challenge like you and me have challenges when we follow Christ, and Thomas' challenge was doubt. Thomas was always doubting if Christ was the Messiah. Whatever he was saying, was it going to come to pass? Whatever Christ was promising them, was it real? And so even when Jesus was crucified, Thomas' faith was even shaken more because he saw Christ die. He saw that they had crucified Christ. And so when the disciples finally tell him, No, Jesus is alive, Thomas says, Unless I see him and I touch the wound, then I will believe. And so when Jesus comes to the disciples, he addresses Thomas' issue and he says, Thomas, don't be doubting. Come and feel me. Come and see the hands and put your fingers like you said you wanted to do. And so Thomas walks to Christ and he places his fingers in the holes of Christ's hands. Christ was not interested in Thomas feeling the flesh, in feeling the wounds, but Christ knew that the moment Thomas sees the holes, his memory would come to life. He would remember what caused the scars. When Thomas sees the wounds and the holes, his mind is picked and taken to the cross where Christ was crucified. And so, Christ could have healed his wound. He could have made sure the tissue was recovered because he was the creator, but he left those scars because he knew that scars, they play an important part in someone's life. Scars don't hurt. They are there to remind you that you fought a battle and you won. You became victorious. That's why you had a scar. Because if you had failed the battle, you were going to die. But because you managed to conquer the battle, you remain with scars. I need you to understand, child of God, that scars in our lives are important. They are there to remind us of how God helped us and fought our battles. When you sit down and look into your house, your empty house because you have lost all your children, those are scars. You will remember how God has managed to sustain you through the pain, through the sickness, through the trauma of being alone. Christ has managed to be faithful to his word, that I am with you. Those scars remind you of God's faithfulness, and they are there to encourage you. When you look at yourself, maybe you have a permanent condition, maybe you are involved in a car accident and you broke your spinal cord and you're in a wheelchair. Those scars are there to remind you that you came out of an accident and you were alive. When you are an orphan like me and you try to think of your father, you try to think of your mother, how painful your journey is, the scar of being an orphan will remind you that God is faithful to his word when he says, I am the father to the fatherless. Yes, you might be having scars of being left. You experience a divorce, a painful one. You will remember the scars when you look at yourself, how alone you have been. But then you will be grateful because you managed to conquer the pain. When Christ says, I am your husband, you look into your life and see that Christ indeed has been faithful. Thomas looks at the scars of Christ and remembers the cross, and he believes and is encouraged. May this encourage someone out there that the scars that you have are not there to bring you down. They will not cause you pain. They will remind you of how you were engaged in a battle and came out victorious. Look into your scars because they are important. Embrace your scars. They are there to make you realize that you are a victor. May the good Lord bless you as we embrace our scars because our scars are important. God bless you.